Welcome back to Head On here on Shaw TV. Ian Holmes discussing the upcoming municipal election, specifically Nanaimo, the big vote coming up here November 15th. The next segment of our program, alongside Spencer Anderson from the Nanaimo Daily News, Dominic Abassi with Island Radio, examining the current Nanaimo City Council administration and some of the hot topic issues over the past few years and what kind of impact that could have on the vote coming up here shortly. First off, Spencer, I'll start with you. This is right up your alley, Colliery Dams. You've written countless articles on this very controversial and costly issue for the city, planning towards how to restore these dams. From your experiences covering the issue and the increasing costs of studying this thing, what kind of impact do you think this will have on the election coming up? And is there some resentment from the voting public on this particular issue, which has dominated the council agenda the last couple of years?
Yeah, tough to say. I mean, it certainly riled people up, that's for sure. You know, over the course of last 2 years, there's been several crucial votes on the topic. People have turned out to voice their opinion. And at times it has certainly gotten heated and, you know, caused, I have no doubt, some political effects of that. How big of an issue of it will it be during the election? I'm not sure. It's an interesting question. I mean, part of the reason it may not be a main issue is that it's still in limbo as it is right now. The last report I did on it, they were had directed their staff to look into, the city staff to look into doing a hydraulic study, which is a more advanced study at what dam failure might look like under a possible flood scenario, for example. And as part of that, I mean, really, this is just looking into whether to do a study. And they're involving the Colliery Dams Preservation Society, the Colliery Dams Parks Preservation Society in that process as well. And that, to my knowledge, has not wrapped up yet. So that issue itself has not run its course yet. There's still information coming forward. It did attract, I mean, certainly, as you pointed out, we've reported on this issue extensively. People do seem to be aware of it. Whether or not it will drive anybody's decision at the ballot box, I guess, is a bit of an unknown at this point, though. Yeah,
it is hard to tell. How much does that resonate, Dom? We've done at Island Radio, done several stories on the increasing cost. Certainly that's going to upset a faction of the community, but does that really play an impact when it comes down to voting day?
Yeah, I mean, and I think Spencer hit it on the head there. It will be interesting to see, and the way I see it, I don't know if it will. I really don't, because a lot of people came and were very outspoken about this issue. It created a lot of heated debate. I mean, I can't even count how many hours, and Spencer knows how many hours of my life I've spent watching people debate the Colliery Dams. But at the end of the day, I think council, the one thing they did, and whether they were influenced too much by special interest groups here or not, that's for you to decide. But they, I think, did a good job of appeasing the people who were very, very opposed to seeing anything happen in Colliery Park. They didn't want to see any changes happen. And council did a good job of, I think, for the most part, making these people feel heard, making them part of the process. They involved Nanaimo, they involved the Colliery Dam Park Preservation Society. They let them sit on committees and make decisions. So those people who were the most motivated to be involved in this topic, they feel like, I bet, at least I think, that they probably had at least a voice in this. The thing I think that hasn't been touched on enough is the money. We're over $2 million in this process here, closing in on 3, I believe, at my last story. And we're nowhere near a decision. And the projected costs we have on the table right now for any repair work are between, you know, $7 and $9 million. So this is could end up costing the city around $10 million, you know, hypothetically, and we've made no decision yet at this point. So the money, taxpayers' money that is being held in limbo here, that's the issue to me, and I don't think people are all that fired up about that issue.
Yeah, it's interesting. You look at some of the other spending that has been done by City Council over the last a few months, some high-profile things. Do people get upset by that when you throw out nearly $8 million for Lindley Valley? That came out of nowhere in June, and then the $4.6 million very recently for the rehearsal space and the performance area at the Port Theatre. You know, I hear like pockets of people upset about that, but it's hard to really tell. And I guess maybe that's local politics for you, where it is tough to really gauge, the electorate on an issue like that. When we talked about the low voter turnout and how these issues galvanize the public, sometimes it's really hard to tell.
I think, with regards to the Lindley Valley purchase, I mean, that purchase received very strong support at council. 8 of 9 council members voted for it. The one who didn't vote for it, Bill McKay, who's now running for mayor, had said really it was a decision that should have gone to the voters to decide, i.e. a referendum. But it's interesting. Back to the colliery issue again. Yeah, they are spending significant time and resources looking into, continuing with the process, looking into further study, consulting with groups like park users, for example. But a lot of that is driven by demand, certainly from certain members of the public who want to see that kind of work happen. I mean, certainly there was consternation from some people about the park purchase in Lindley, for example. But on the other hand, there were lots of people who supported it very wholeheartedly. And the same thing with the colliery project to a certain degree. I mean, yes, they are undergoing this process right now, but a lot of that process is driven by people in the community who are asking the council to look into this information. So that may have an impact on how people vote on the issue.
And spending is something that's really close to a lot of people's heart in any jurisdiction, really, Dom. And I mean, do you think those two projects specifically will hurt the city, the incumbents running for mayor, or does that not really matter? Gary Corpin, who's running for mayor, pointed to the Port Theatre issue as a big issue. Like, hey, this came out of nowhere, not in our plan, and we're throwing $4.5 million towards the Port Theatre.
Well, I think that should be a big lead for voters, shouldn't it? A guy who used to be the mayor, I would imagine, has followed civic politics very closely in the city that he still lives in and has lived in for a very long time. He's come out, and you talk about making a campaign poster and what are you running on. You interviewed him. I stood there and heard you, and the first thing he said to Ian was, if I get elected mayor, I'm going to come in and I'm going to reverse the decision to spend $4.6 million on and expand the Port Theatre. He said nobody wants a rehearsal space, and it came out of nowhere, and it jumped the queue, and it went through incredibly quickly with seemingly unfettered support. Everyone thought it was the greatest idea that they'd heard at that meeting. So that should be a cue, I think, to voters that this is an issue that whether you're for it or against it, should be something that you're considering. Hey, this is $5 million, a pretty healthy percentage of the overall budget of the city that has been spent. Do we support this or don't we? And do you care that you really didn't have a chance to have a say one way or the other on this one? That should be, I think, a cue to voters that that's an issue for sure.
Conversely, and John Rattan talks about this a lot, the mayor currently, about the things that are happening with the 2 downtown tower hotel proposals that look like they're on their way to being approved. Some unanswered questions, albeit on the front, especially with the conference center issue. The fast ferry direct link Vancouver to Nanaimo, there seems to be, it looks like it's potentially going to happen. A little more capital is required, but these are things that Rattan has really pushed for. Well, could that benefit the current administration on the increased amount of money being spent in Nanaimo, specifically the downtown core, to get the investment and potentially quite a few jobs up in the service industry, Spencer?
I think it speaks to the narrative that the city is on the rise economically. That is, that there's evidence to say that there's growing investor interest in Nanaimo.
Is that something that the incumbent councillors can really reap rewards from, though, potentially?
Well, I think they could make the argument that increased investment means more business, it means more money into the local economy, means a bigger tax base for the city, which, let's face it, is what any elected official wants. If you're an elected official and you have improved revenue coming in, and you have improved business, and you have an economic climate that is promising, that does help. That does help. So yeah, I mean, I think these projects are indicative of, as I say, some interest in the city. But whether or not voters care about that or not, I guess, is a different question. I think some certainly do. But it seems interesting to me. Like, I don't see any one single issue right now emerging to the forefront as something that voters really care about. I think there's a lot of different things going on all at once, and it's really hard to say. Really hard to say which one is taking precedence over the other. I mean, certainly, you know, Dominic made mention of the former mayor Gary Corpin promising to withdraw the funding for the city's funding for the port expansion, and you do see other candidates promising a core review and things like that. But you know, on the other hand, who's to say that those issues will be forefront in voters' minds? It's really difficult to say, and because there's so many candidates running, it doesn't exactly paint a clear issue, because candidates and politicians define issues. That's what they do. They speak to issues and they raise them, and with so many voices in the field and with so many issues on the plate, it's really hard to see any one of them emerging over the other. Yeah,
there are a lot of issues, Dom, and I think you raise a good point, Spencer, that nothing is, you know, the #1 issue, but there are a lot of big issues that are kind of brewing in Nanaimo right now.
Well, it's a great point, and I actually saw a Twitter exchange today. Diane Brennan, current councillor who is running for re-election, she mentioned that there was a sort of an election forum, all candidates or new candidates meeting the other night, and she was sort of saying that we didn't really talk about social issues very much in this meeting, and they didn't come up, and particularly pointing to the vital signs report that came out not too long ago, talking about quality of life here on mid-Vancouver Island, saying, hey, we have a lot of people who can barely afford housing, and can these people that can barely afford a roof over their head, can they put food on their tables? So you've got a whole nother sector of social issues, which some of the candidates that are on the council going up to be a councillor, those people will speak to those social issues, I think. But then you also have the issues of the economy and the fast ferry and hotels. So there's a big split, I think, and it just depends, I guess, which faction comes out and turns out with the numbers on voting day as to whether we're going to be a city council moving ahead that's focused on social issues or economic issues, or maybe a blending of both. And I think that this council right now has tried very hard to be a blend. You see them moving ahead with social housing and you know, with a lot of the work that has been done with John Horn and getting supportive housing stuff in place, and then their direction with the fast ferry and with the hotels. So will we see a continuation of moving towards a blend of issues, or maybe we'll see some focus on one direction for this city?
Fascinating stuff. Well, we'll get into it more in depth. The race for mayor coming up on the other side, and also for Nanaimo City Council as we examine the upcoming election here in Nanaimo, November 15th, municipal election province-wide, focusing on the Harbour City now. Spencer Anderson with the Daily News, Dominic Abassi with Island Radio. More on Head On right after this.